Okay, so have you ever like completely blanked when you're trying to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Like you just kind of freeze up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially like in a new situation, right?
Definitely new situations.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are going to deep dive into a whole bunch of sources.
Okay, cool.
And all of these have to do with how to introduce yourself.
That's good.
Yeah. And so there's stuff in here for like professional settings, casual settings, in person, online, all different kinds of things. So
Different age groups even.
yeah. There's stuff in here for like if you're introducing yourself to someone much older, much younger.
Interesting.
We'll even look at like cultural differences.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that.
And even some like weird grammar stuff
Oh, cool.
you can use in English that'll make you sound a lot more natural.
Okay.
All right. So are you ready to dive in?
Alrighty.
Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was this 4-step method for effortless introductions.
Oh.
So one of the sources was talking about this, and it claims to be like totally foolproof. So I'm curious to hear what you think.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's like the first step?
Well, the first step is all about ditching the canned lines,
Right. Yeah.
and actually trying to find a connection in the moment, like a genuine connection.
Yeah.
So, for example, you're at a coffee shop and you see someone reading a book that you loved. You could casually say like, hey, I loved that book. What did you think of? And then mention a specific character or plot point or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. So instead of like, hey, my name is so-and-so, like, kind of a more natural way to ease into the conversation.
Exactly.
Okay. So what's step 2?
So step 2 is where you slip in your self-introduction, but it's connected to what you just said. So it feels natural,
Right.
So in the
Right.
example we were just using, you could be like, I'm Emma, by the way. I've been meaning to reread that book or something like that.
Right. Yeah. So it's not like you're just blurting out your name.
Yeah.
You're actually continuing that conversation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay. So then what's step 3?
Step 3 is engaging with a relevant question to keep the conversation flowing.
Mm-hmm.
Since you're already talking about the book, you could ask, have you read anything else by that author? Or what are you reading next?
Right.
Shows genuine interest and, keeps things moving.
I like that it kind of takes the pressure off of you to be super witty or have some amazing like opening line, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we've eased into the conversation. We've introduced ourselves. We've asked a question. What's the final step?
So the final step is ending on a positive note.
Okay.
You don't have to like force a long conversation, but you want to leave a good impression,
Great.
So you could say something like, it was great chatting with you, Emma. Enjoy the rest of your book. Or something simple like that.
Yeah, I like that it's simple. And to the point, okay, so I can already see how this 4-step method could work for those like everyday interactions, at the coffee shop or wherever. But what about in situations that feel a little bit more high stakes?
Like, say, a networking event where you really want to make a good first impression.
Yeah, so actually one of the sources talks about this idea of crafting a 60-second self-introduction.
Okay, a 60-second self-introduction.
Yeah, and before you panic, it's not like cramming your whole life story into a minute.
Right.
It's more about like presenting the most relevant information about yourself in a really concise and confident way.
Okay, so it's like a verbal business card almost.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. So how would you structure something like that?
So the magic formula here is who you are, what you do, and why you're there.
Okay.
So, for example, at a networking event for tech professionals, you might say, hi, everyone, I'm Daniel. I'm a software developer who's passionate about building user-friendly mobile apps. I'm here to connect with other innovators and learn about the latest trends in app development.
Boom. You've covered it all.
Right.
Okay, that's a lot less intimidating than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Cool. So you can adapt that formula to different settings, I imagine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Now, what about those situations where you need to switch gears between like a formal introduction
Right.
and an informal introduction?
Yeah. That's
So like, what are some tips for that?
Well, one of the things that the sources talk about is really reading the room,
Yeah.
and adjusting your language accordingly. And even just the small little trick they mentioned for sounding more natural in informal settings is using contractions,
Oh, yeah. Like I'm instead of I am.
Exactly. It's instead of it is.
Yeah.
Just little things like that can make you sound more relaxed and approachable.
Yeah, it's true because like, hey there, I'm Sarah. Sounds a lot more friendly than good evening, I am Sarah.
Exactly.
Like I'm here to do business,
Right.
Yeah, it's like choosing the right outfit for the occasion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've talked about in-person introductions. What about online introductions?
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other world.
Right. Especially on like professional networks. Like, how do you make yourself stand out when everyone's just scrolling through profiles?
Right. So the sources emphasize brevity and clarity are key here.
Okay.
So, imagine you're scrolling through LinkedIn. You're going to skip over a long, rambling introduction, right?
Probably.
But something short and impactful is going to grab your attention.
Right.
Like, hello, I'm John. I'm a marketing strategist with a passion for helping businesses grow their online presence. I'm always open to connecting with fellow marketers.
Okay, so it's kind of like, a tweet almost.
Yeah.
Really concise to the point.
Beautifully. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of different types of introductions, but something I'm super curious about is how cultural differences kind of come into play.
Right.
Did the sources dig into that at all?
They did. And it's really fascinating, actually. There's so much variation across cultures.
Yeah.
The sources compare like North American norms with other cultural practices.
Okay.
And it's really eye-opening.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we don't realize how much our own culture shapes the way we introduce ourselves.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the key things to be aware of when you're introducing yourself in a cross-cultural setting?
Well, everything from the level of formality to the use of physical touch can differ.
Oh, wow.
Significantly, For instance, in some cultures, direct eye contact is considered really respectful.
Mm-hmm.
But in other cultures, it can be seen as confrontational.
Yeah.
And while a handshake might be standard in North America, a bow or a nod might be more appropriate in another culture.
Wow, that's so interesting. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that just shows you how important it is to be sensitive to those cultural differences.
Definitely.
Okay, now before we move on, you mentioned some grammar power-ups for introductions.
Yeah.
What are some common mistakes that non-native English speakers should watch out for?
Okay, so one that the source has highlighted is the difference between the present perfect and the simple past tense.
Okay, the present perfect versus simple past.
Yeah. Classic.
Got it.
So, for example, if you wanted to say you lived in France for a period of time, but you don't anymore, you would use the simple past. I lived in France for 5 years.
Okay.
But if you still live there, you'd use the present perfect. I have lived in France for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all about the timeline,
Exactly.
Is it something that's finished or is it something that's still happening?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. And speaking of tricky grammar, the sources also mentioned the difference between since and for when you're talking about times.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
Okay, so since is used with a specific point in time, like since 2010. For is used with a duration of time, like for 5 years.
Okay.
So if you started learning English in 2018, you'd say, I have been learning English since 2018. But if you've been learning for a total of 3 years, you'd say, I have been learning English for 3 years.
Okay. Yeah, it's a subtle distinction,
It is.
but an important one.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. Well, I think we've already uncovered a ton of tips for different types of introductions, casual, professional, in person, online, even across cultures.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling a lot more confident already.
Good.
But let's keep going.
Okay.
What else did we miss in these sources?
Okay, let's see. Well, one of the things that really struck me as we were looking through these sources is how a lot of these introduction strategies can be adapted to different situations.
Oh, really?
It's not like you need a totally different approach for every single scenario.
Okay, that's a relief because I was starting to think I needed a spreadsheet or something to keep track of all these tips.
Right.
Yeah. So you're saying there's some universal principles that we can apply to pretty much any introduction.
Yeah, I think so. For example, remember that tip about finding a genuine connection in the moment?
Yeah.
Well, that can work wonders even in a job interview situation.
Oh, interesting.
Let's say you're in a job interview and you notice a picture of a dog on the interviewer's desk. You could casually say something like, oh, I'm a huge dog lover too. What breed is yours?
Right. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So it's you're instantly breaking the ice,
Yeah.
showing that you're paying attention.
Mhm.
And it's hey, we're both human beings here.
Nice.
Let's connect.
Exactly. It just makes you more memorable.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, now beyond the words we use, what about body language?
Oh, yeah. The sources talk about that too.
Right, because body language is a whole other language, right?
It is. Yeah. It can speak volumes, sometimes even louder than our words.
Absolutely. A warm smile, good eye contact, a confident posture can make you so much more approachable and likable, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I've even heard about this technique called mirroring, where you subtly mimic the other person's body language
Oh, yeah.
to try to build rapport?
hmm
Like, is there any truth to that?
It's a really fascinating psychological phenomenon, actually.
Yeah.
When we subtly mirror someone's posture or their gestures, it kind of signals to their subconscious that we're on the same wavelength as them.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah, and it creates this sense of like harmony and connection.
So it's not about like mimicking them exactly, but just kind of like finding a natural rhythm,
Right.
creating a sense of ease.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Now, one thing that I know a lot of people struggle with, especially when they're introducing themselves in a new language, is the fear of making mistakes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like they get so caught up in worrying about their grammar or pronunciation
Mm-hmm.
that they just kind of freeze up.
Right.
Yeah.
So
So what do you do about that?
Well, the thing to remember is that everyone makes mistakes,
Yeah, that's true.
even native speakers.
All the time.
Yeah, it's just part of being human.
Yeah.
The key is to not let that fear of imperfection stop you from actually practicing and putting yourself out there.
Right. So did the sources have any advice on like how to overcome that fear?
Yeah, one of the tips that really resonated with me was to shift your focus from perfection to progress.
Okay.
So instead of beating yourself up over every little mistake,
Right.
you celebrate how far you've come. Remember those tricky grammar points we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Each time you use them correctly, that's a victory.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. It's like you're focusing on the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly.
Yeah. What other practical tips did they have for like building confidence?
Well, one technique is to record yourself practicing your introductions.
Oh, yeah.
I know it can feel a little awkward at first.
It's like having your own personal coach.
Right. It is, yeah. And you can spot those little things that you might not notice in the moment, like filler words or nervous habits.
Right.
It just makes you more self-aware, and that awareness is the first step to improvement.
Totally. Okay. Now, remember those grammar power-ups we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Did the sources dig into those a little bit more?
They did, and I think they're worth revisiting.
Okay. Grammar geeks, gather around.
All right. So one that often trips people up is the difference between the present perfect continuous and the simple past tense when talking about experiences.
Mm.
So, for example, if you're currently living in London, you would say, I have been living in London for 5 years. But if you live there in the past, but you don't anymore, you would say, I lived in London for 3 years.
Okay. So again, it's all about the timeline.
Yeah,
Are we talking about something that's still happening or something that's finished?
exactly.
Got it. Okay. And then those tricky words, since and for,
Right.
can be kind of confusing.
Definitely.
So remind us again how those work.
Okay, so since is used with a specific point in time,
Okay.
like since 2015, while for is used with a duration of time, like
Right.
for 5 years.
Okay. So if I started learning English in 2018,
Mm-hmm.
I would say I have been learning English since 2018.
Yes,
But if I've been learning English for a total of 3 years, I would say I've been learning English for 3 years.
exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So mastering these little nuances
Mm.
can really make your English sound more polished and natural.
It does. Yeah.
Like you're leveling up your language skills. Okay, good. Now, I loved that some of the sources really encouraged us to get creative with our introductions.
Yes.
Especially in those more informal settings.
Yeah.
Who says introductions have to be boring,
Great.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So one source suggested using storytelling as a way to make your introduction more engaging.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
So instead of just listing your hobbies,
Ah.
you could share a quick anecdote that reveals your passion.
Yeah. Like, for example, instead of saying, I like photography,
Right.
you could say, I recently took this amazing photo of a sunset over the city, and I realized how much I love capturing those like fleeting moments of beauty.
Right. It's a story,
Exactly.
not just a statement.
Right.
So much more compelling.
Yeah,
And it's a natural conversation starter, too.
it is. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then another tip was to end your introduction with an open-ended question
Mm-hmm.
or an invitation to connect further.
Yeah.
So instead of just kind of trailing off, you could say something like, I'm always on the lookout for new hiking trails. Do you have any favorites in the area? Or I'm trying to learn more about web design. Do you know of any good resources?
Exactly. It just shows that you're genuinely interested in the other person
Right.
and opens the door for a deeper conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked about adapting our introductions to different settings, but what about introductions in large groups?
Oh, yeah.
That can be a little bit overwhelming.
It can be.
So any tips for that?
Yeah, so one approach is to start by addressing the group as a whole
Okay.
with a simple greeting like, "Hi, everyone, I'm David. It's great to be here." And then as you have the opportunity to chat with individuals within the group, you can personalize your introduction,
Oh.
highlight any shared interests or connections.
Right, that makes sense. So you're kind of casting a wide net
Yeah,
and then focusing in on who you vibe with.
exactly.
I like that.
Mhm.
Okay, and then speaking of different dynamics, what about introducing yourself to someone who's significantly older or younger than you? Are there any special considerations there?
Well, as with many things in the social realm, it really depends on cultural norms and context.
Yeah.
You know, in some cultures, it's really important to show deference to elders using formal titles like Mr. or Mrs., even in casual settings.
Right.
But in other cultures, a more informal approach might be totally fine as long as it's respectful.
Okay, so it sounds like a good rule of thumb is to maybe err on the side of formality,
Yeah.
especially if you're not sure of the cultural norms.
I would agree with that. It's always better to be slightly more formal than too casual.
Yeah.
Especially when you're first meeting someone, and then you can always adjust your tone as you get to know them better.
Right, totally. Okay, so we've covered the older generation. What about the younger generation?
Right.
Like I sometimes struggle with that. I don't come across as too stiff or out of touch.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
Well, the sources highlighted the importance of respect regardless of age. You know, even if there's a big age difference, treating someone younger with courtesy and genuine interest goes a long way.
Absolutely.
And remember, you don't have to pretend to be hip or use slang that you don't understand.
Right.
Just be yourself.
Authenticity wins again.
It always does.
Okay, I'm loving all these practical tips. Let's keep unpacking these sources. What other introduction secrets are hiding in there?
Okay, let's see. Well, you know, one theme that keeps coming up in these sources is the idea of confidence.
Oh, yeah. Confidence is huge.
It is, and it's interesting because confidence isn't necessarily about being the loudest person in the room
Right.
or having like the most impressive accomplishments.
Yeah.
It's more about this sense of self-assurance
Right.
and a belief in your own value.
Yeah, it's like that inner knowing that you have something to offer,
Exactly.
even if you're not totally sure what it is yet.
Right.
But what if you're just like not feeling confident?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you fake it till you make it?
You know, the sources actually talk about this idea of power posing.
Power posing. Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah.
It sounds a little woo-woo, but tell me more.
Well, it might sound a little woo-woo, but there's actually some really interesting research behind it.
Okay.
Studies have shown that holding a powerful posture, even for just a few minutes, can actually shift your internal state.
Wow. Okay, so how does this work?
So think about like a superhero, you know, standing tall, chest out, arms akimbo.
Okay.
Like that's a power pose.
Right.
When you hold these expansive postures, it can actually increase your levels of testosterone,
Oh, wow.
which is the hormone associated with confidence and dominance.
Okay.
And it decreases cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
So you're saying if I stand like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes before I give a presentation,
Yeah.
I'll actually feel more confident.
The research suggests it could have a real impact
Okay.
on your mindset and how you project yourself.
I love that.
It's like you're sending a signal to your brain and body that
Right.
you're in control,
Yeah.
and that can translate into greater confidence.
It's like a little confidence hack.
It is.
I like it. Okay. So we got the power posing down.
Mm-hmm.
What about like the content of our introductions? We've talked about different settings and situations, but is there a way to tailor our introduction to our specific goals?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's crucial to have a really clear understanding of what you want to achieve with your introduction.
Right.
Are you looking to make a professional connection, find a mentor, land a job, or just have a fun conversation?
So it's like setting an intention
It is.
for that interaction.
Yeah. So, you don't know if you're at a networking event and your goal is to land a job, you know, your introduction might focus on your skills and experience. Like, hi, I'm Jessica, and I'm a graphic designer specializing in branding and visual identity. I'm really excited about the work being done in the sustainable design space, and I'm always open to connecting with people who share that passion. But if you're at a party, you know, you might take a more lighthearted approach like, hi, I'm Alex, and I just moved here from California. I'm a total foodie, and I'm on a mission to find the best tacos in town. Any recommendation?
Right. So it's all about being strategic
It is.
and playing to the context of the situation.
Exactly.
Okay, now something I hear from people sometimes is they feel like they just don't have anything interesting to say
Oh, yeah.
when they introduce themselves.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah, like how do you combat that?
Well, I think that comes from a misconception that we don't all have unique stories and experiences
Right.
that make us interesting.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of tapping into those
Yeah.
and finding a way to share them.
Okay, so how do we find those hidden gems?
Well, one technique that I like is to think about your elevator pitch.
Oh, the elevator pitch.
Yeah. So imagine you're in an elevator with someone you really admire
Okay.
and you only have a few seconds to make an impression.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to capture their attention
Right.
and leave them wanting to know more?
So it forces you to be concise.
It does.
Get to the heart of your story.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be about your job or profession. It could be about a passion project, a volunteer experience, a travel adventure.
Yeah.
Anything that lights you up and shows something unique about you.
I love that. Okay, so we've covered so much today.
We have
Power posing elevator pitches,
Rhymer hacks.
grammar hacks, cultural nuances. I'm feeling really inspired
Good.
to revamp my own introduction style.
Awesome.
So, any final words of wisdom before we wrap up this deep dive?
You know, I think at its core, introducing yourself is really an act of connection.
Mm,
It's about putting yourself out there, sharing a piece of yourself with the world.
Yeah,
and inviting others to do the same.
I love that.
So embrace those moments of introduction.
Yeah.
Practice your heart out, and most importantly, have fun with it.
Yes.
You never know what amazing connections you might make.
That is a beautiful way to wrap it up. So remember, every introduction is a chance to spark a conversation, build a relationship, or even change the course of your life. So go out there and make those introductions count.